want to confirm that in the following months I will be playing and analyzing every Armored Core game I possibly can here on the channel, and I'm honestly very excited about that. Yes, I know, I'm terrible at this, and I should probably stop saying I got a new thing going before having anything done. But back in November, when I published my Armored Core 6 video, I said that throughout the earlier months of 2023, I will be playing through the entire Armored Core series as I get myself familiar in anticipation for the release of the newest entry, Fires of Rubicon. But stuff unfortunately got in the way that didn't make that possible. You see, I don't actually own consoles from the PS360 era and below, and I don't have the space in my setup to put any more consoles. So I was experimenting with emulation. At first I looked into the emulators that were available in the Xbox console's retail mode on my Series S, and I really had a perfect thing going on and I was ready to record. That was up until Microsoft banned them, which made it difficult for me to conveniently record the game. While I was looking through ways of emulating the games and not leaving the channel dead, I experimented reviewing new game releases as they came out, and I'm really happy with how that came out, especially my review of Resident Evil 4 Remake, which no joke I got 100 subs in a month, and right now it's sitting at 11k views, my most views video, which I can thank you guys enough for enjoying that review as it was fun to record and put it together. So, back on track. This whole ordeal left me with the option of playing and recording through my laptop. If you know anything about laptops, then you're aware those two don't usually go hand in hand. Gaming laptops make it somewhat possible, but it's still a stretch as you'll just be cutting years of span from your hardware. Having said that, my laptop actually afforded me the chance of carrying that out, and since DuckStation, the PS1 emulator, isn't very demanding, I threw myself into the lion's den and surprise surprise, I came out unscathed. Not only did the emulation work wonderfully, but never did I once had issues recording. I just hope the same speaks true when it comes to playing the PS2 entries, which I'm very much excited to do so. So, Armored Core. For me, when getting into a series, I really love going back and seeing its history as it evolved throughout the years, so I can have a better appreciation for their intent and how the culture around the time had an effect on the development of the game. This being From's fourth game and first in the mech combat genre really speaks volumes of their standards and commitment to releasing high quality games that we can still see to this day. They've had some mishaps throughout the years, just like any other company for sure. No one's perfect. Even Naughty Dog released a pretty mediocre fighting game back in the day. But to still remain relevant in this industry for 37 years is nothing short of an achievement, as nowadays it is pretty hard to do so, especially at their levels where budgets are so ballooned upwards to $200 million that creative risk taking is just not feasible anymore. All of this to say that Armored Core on the PS1 plus the standalone expansions are some of the best produced content at the time, not just for what they did as games but what they brought to the genre and the subsequent entries in the series. From the customization, combat, environmental variety, music and narrative, they really went all out to deliver something that they would be proud of. It's not a perfect package of course, and there are some elements I don't really gel with, but as a whole it's a strong set of games I wouldn't struggle recommending to people, and today I want to talk about them. But before we start, a quick word from our sponsor. You, the viewer. Thank you so much for watching. Now on with the show. Before the dual analog controller became the standardized models that many console manufacturers would adopt, the first PlayStation controller actually featured no sticks, and in most games, especially 3D, you'd make use of the D-pad to move and the rest was up to the developers. A few years after, the dual analog controller was introduced and released in April 1997, but given that Armored Core was most likely in development for a long time, all three PS1 entries and even Armored Core 2 on the PS2, weirdly enough, committed to the previous controller layout, and the scheme looks like this. Nowadays, most veterans from back in the day have no problems as they grew up playing the games like that. But for newcomers it's really intimidating, myself included, as at first I struggled to wrap around how to fluently make use of the controls, especially in later entries where the difficulty is ridiculously ramped up with enemies flying out of your field of view and using the triggers and D-pad to move your camera, making the ordeal less favorable. At first, I tried my best to really commit to it and stick with the controls for maybe the first 9 sorties, which is what the missions are called, by the way. And I was doing alright, but in all honesty I was actually fighting with the game and the controls itself. And after some time I got exhausted and took a quick break. During that break I researched online what people have done to tolerate it, like custom control schemes and the sort. And I came across this post on the Armored Core subreddit from user CrashmanX, where they gave their ideal set of custom controls for the game. I thought it looked really great, and I quickly went to DuckStation to customize it. But the way they wrote the settings in the post confused me and I struggled to set it up. Lucky me, another user commented on how they just use Steam input to set it up, and so I did just that, and today, ladies and gentlemen, I want to present you the DuckStation Armored Core PS1 semi-modern controls scheme. The way I set it up makes it so both the dual analog sticks work and the game controls reflect how it could have been if it were to come out nowadays. The left stick and D-pad are used for player movement, the right stick and face buttons are used for camera control, the left bumper is used to boost, the right bumper is used to shoot, the left trigger used for melee attacks and opening doors as it is within the original scheme, and the right trigger is used to swap weapons. Now beware that both triggers are not 100% perfect, as the game still misinputs both triggers for camera control, meaning when you swap weapons the character will look up, and when you try to hit something the camera moves down. So what you want to do in case you're dealing with it, come here to edit layout, press triggers, then press the gear icon. And what you want to do is come down to analog output trigger and turn both triggers off, so it doesn't occur again. I have also uploaded this scheme to community layouts, so if you ever want to use it or make some alteration that will benefit your needs, feel more than free to do so. After setting this up, I tested it, and in this first clip you can see how I started the game without it. And in the next one you can see the difference.
Test mode engaged.
It really was transformative and it carried me through all 3 games, which, now that this is all out of the way, it's time to check out what these games are all about. In this entry, you work as a silent mercenary known as a Raven, a pilot who controls these big man-made hunks of metal and oil weapons of mass destructions known as armor cores. Mechs that, by featuring such a modular design of having their main core block in their chest, as it contains the joint connectors, cockpit, and engine, it allows for many combinations to be had without sacrificing the core of what they are meant to do. See what I did there? And fun fact, this idea was proposed by the mech designer Shoji Kawamori, a very influential creator in the anime industry who also designed Nero's many Devil Breakers in the MC5 as a recent point of reference. And later on, this concept came to be the official descriptor for the series moving forward. As a Raven, you are part of the Raven's Nest, a management organization that houses many multiple Ravens and acts as a sort of neutral entity within the universe. In a sense, Ravens are the equivalent of freelancers, where they are not barred from working with any company and anyone is free to take up on the work as they please. And the nest itself serves as a safe haven where pilots can resupply, carry out repairs, and in some cases team up with other pilots, as it's seen in Project Phantasma, but more on that later. From the get-go, one of my favorite aspects of this game is the narrative. The game takes a lot of inspiration from fictional and non-fictional works and conflicts where major emphasis is placed on world governments collapsing and major corporations now being the major world monopolies where they heavily influence the state of the world. While this setup isn't novel, it's what you make of it when you tackle it that makes it interesting. Mike Pondsmith's Cyberpunk universe has some of my favorite world lore and setups where you try your best to live to see another day while residing in Night City, the city that never sleeps, actively trying to drown you alive. It's that balance between tension and hope that gets me hooked into that world and how the stories within it play out. 2077 and Edge Runners are some of the most finely written stories within that universe, and god damn it, they really fed me poison so I could buy their cure. Circling back, Armored Core does most of the same, and the setup and lore they have for Gen 1 is so intriguing and captivating that it instantly grabbed me the more I started consuming every information I could. While I won't spend most of my time in this video talking about the story and lore with full clarity, if you're new to the series like me and want to check lore channels, I heavily recommend Armored Core lore. If us Souls fans have VatiVidya for our dose of lore info, Armored Core lore is the equivalent to the AC series. He has such an eloquent and straightforward way of presenting the information like he's telling a story. A really great writer, and from the videos I used for research for Gen 1 Armored Core, he's the go-to guy to get yourselves immersed in, so go check him out. The game loop for this game is fairly simple. Given you're a mercenary for hire, you're offered multiple tasks by various companies such as Chrome or Murakumo Millennium, as they both try to compete to be the one on top. And you're given the choice of who you want to partner with based on the many emails you get through the course of the game, and which corpo org you determine fits the type of character you want to roleplay. These tasks are simple, from defeating a specific number of enemies or destroying certain structures like tanks or field artillery to progress, which usually lasts between 3 and 5 minutes depending on your build. But the more you move up in the ladder, the more complex and lengthy these requests become, upwards of 20 to 25 minutes, such as defense missions, full-on assaults, to even battling other ACs, where all the skills you've learned so far will be put to the test. The environments you happen to partake in are also varied and complex, showcasing the talent the team had with the PS1 hardware at the time, and they still hold up tremendously well, from infiltrating bases, getting ambushed in an underwater station, to raiding a space station. It's very creative, and the latter expansions keep on giving, making the entire experience feel fresh and exciting. Like I mentioned, I played these games through an emulator, and while I could have used some of the settings that modernize certain technical areas like geometry correction or perspective correct texture, those ended up introducing visual glitches, which is why I only enabled what was needed, and also toggle downsample for a more authentic experience because it's more fun for me to see through the lens of how this stuff was rendered back then. When it comes to controlling the ACs themselves, it's very intuitive. They don't do much on the surface, as you can perform most of your typical basic maneuvers like walking or strafing, boosting, shooting and meleeing enemies. The depth, however, comes from how you can chain all of these together to become a death machine. This isn't a case of simple to control, hard to master, because to be on your top game you have to put in the work to be as efficient and agile the more the difficulty increases. I also love how the lock-on system works, where instead of it playing like a traditional third-person shooter where you have to accurately point and shoot from a reticle, as long as you have your enemy centered on the FCS, which is the square on screen, the auto-lock system does its job, allowing you to focus on other aspects such as strafing and boosting to avoid enemy fire. I do have to say that it can get pretty annoying when you're introduced to enemies that can move really fast, and it's hard to keep track of them when the camera itself can get pretty shoddy at points. And yes, I know that the turning speed is actually tied to your AC's configurations, but the camera not collaborating when you need the most can become frustrating. It's also good to see that the poisonous swamps and invisible walls have remained a tradition even back in the 90s. What I really like about the structure of these missions is how they are treated as one and done endeavors. Unless you're safe scumming, when you lose on a mission they become unavailable, and you'll just have to move on to the next one. The game structure allows that to happen, and it's really refreshing to play a game where you can't expect what will happen in the next minute. Some missions are mandatory, and in the case of a loss you'll just have to go back to your garage and customize your AC appropriately to the mission requirements. One of the biggest game design pillars of the AC series is customization, and how the afforded player expression brought by the depth of it allows for some of the most archaic, basic or Machiavellian builds to be made, whether for mission completion's sake or for the fun of it. And it's impressive how in-depth you can go with this first iteration of the formula. Since I'm a basic person, I went through most of the main game just upgrading my mech for mission completion's sake, because the economy in this game was really kicking my ass in what I could purchase and what I couldn't. But once I got to Master Arena, I loosened myself up to be more experimental, and I really like what I came up with. The glue that holds all of these possibilities together, I believe, is the weight management system in place. I don't know how it's handled in later entries, but what I really like about it here is how the devs went to great lengths to allow you to have a highly customizable mech, while also adhering to the idea that some combinations are just not meant to be, for the sake of the game design to remain cohesive. So in its place you have to carefully manage the type of machine you want to pilot. If you want to be nimble and fast, you have to choose parts that fit that playstyle at the sacrifice of heavy artillery like cannons and such. Or if you want to be another commando on the move, you can just go bonkers and equip the heaviest artillery there is to be had and become an unstoppable killing machine. It's truly impressive how varied your build can become when you're let loose, which is undoubtedly the best way to approach this design choice, as the payoffs are always exciting. The one thing I still can make sense of is the economy. You see, at the end of each mission, depending on your performance, you're rewarded with credit to customize your AC. Part of the money you earn goes automatically into general maintenance and resupply of your mech, but the rest you're free to do as you please. The weird aspect about it, and please veterans correct me if I'm wrong on this, is how money doesn't stack up after each mission. On one side, I can see how this makes sense, because if you could stack up, by mission 9 or 10 you'd be able to purchase the most powerful parts the game has to offer, killing any incentive to engage with customization once you have the most powerful parts to make use of. But at the same time, you can actually overdraft your account and go into debt, so to say, where you won't be able to do much customization and you're forced to go on the mission so you can earn more money if your performance is top notch. What I think really happens is how your performance on the previous mission already takes the money you currently own for general maintenance, and the money you earn from that same mission makes up for what you had. I haven't done the math yet, so I'm really unsure of what to think about all of this. Currently, Kota Hoshino is widely known as the main composer for Armored Core games, starting with Master of Arena, but for this entry in Project Phantasma, it was an entirely different person. Two individuals in fact, named Masaru Tateyama and Keiichiro Segawa. There isn't much info about Masaru as he's only credited for the first two games, but Keiichiro on the other hand has been pretty busy, shifting from sound design and composition to marketing in a variety of projects such as Armored Core 2, Evergrace, Shadow Tower, Otogi, and more recently holding it down as the marketing manager for the Kingdom Hearts games. And it's fascinating because from the little these two guys had in soundtrack composition for this series, they really made a strong impact with these two games, having a soundtrack that blends various forms of electronic music, especially in an era where the introduction of the PS1 and its disc player had a huge transformative effect on the music scene in how sound designers and game composers could easily sample music, with the most popular genre being drum and bass. The music in all three games is very sparse, but when it hits, it comes swinging with hard-hitting electro bass, electrifying synths to more subliminal and chilling tracks in the spookier missions. It delivered in both variety and uniqueness, and it's for sure up there as a great soundtrack. Looking back, I'm actually torn on the story, mainly on how you should consume it, because the way I played these games was from release order, being this entry, Project Phantasma, and then Master of Arena, and believe me when I tell you, at first I really wasn't feeling the story, as most of the exposition came through the emails, and trying to keep up with it felt disorientating. It got to the point where I was just playing for the sake of playing, and I would occasionally be surprised when a cutscene played out, or when I got to the final missions where some plot details became more prevalent, like Nine Ball and the true intentions of the Raven's Nest. Maybe I'm ignorant, but the game doesn't really make an effort to properly introduce you to the world and some of the conflicts in the first hours, which could affect your enjoyment of this whole thing. So, color me surprised when I booted Project Phantasma and this complaint went immediately out of the window. Phantasma takes place 2 years before the main events of the main game, and in it, you play as an entirely different Raven who gets contacted by another Raven named Sumika, who serves as your ally and client, as you both team up to battle against the Doomsday Organization, as they plot a secret weapon codenamed Project Phantasma, while also having to deal with the disturbances of Stinger, who plans to protect it at all costs. This time around, I think what grabbed me about this entry the most is how it feels more personal than any of the 3 entries. Don't get me wrong, I love narratives where I can take myself out of the picture and just be an observant to see how stories and conflicts can occur in universes that have strong rules and systems that need to be abided to, with Cyberpunk as an example. But I also love stories where the focus is just on a small cast of characters and how they also deal with said rules and systems as they try to navigate them to achieve their goal. Which is why the story immediately stood out not even 2 missions in, which I love. Praise also goes to PP's Phantasma's approach to storytelling. Besides game reviews, I don't really know how devs gauged community feedback back then, but you can clearly see there's been a shift in how they approach it in subsequent expansions. Maybe because they had the content and assets ready to go from the main game already, and they could just focus on improving in other aspects. But regardless, the way they started handling the presentation aspect, I believe, came to influence further entries from the few very clips I've seen online. Equally to the narrative, missions also feel more structured to service the story, whereas in the main game you're just given objectives to complete for one of the 2 companies. Here they are tailor-made to carry the narrative, like featuring more in-game cutscenes and the approach they took to both emails and briefings descriptions, making the added variety the more refreshing. It also being the shortest campaign of the three means most of the focus went into telling that story, paying off big time. To no surprise, these sequences are also voice acted, and let me tell you that they are neither bad nor good, but serviceable. In general, voice acting wasn't a major focus back in the 90s for most developers, apart from genres where the story is front and center, like The Curse of the Monkey Island for example. Which is why the quality of these performances doesn't bother me that much. I actually find it amusing that it often gives vibes of a Saturday morning cartoon show.
Trespassers detected. Get rid of them immediately.
Listen, I don't like annoyances.
Trespassers detected. Get rid of them immediately.
I would like to ask for your help again later. You are quite a strong ally to have. Just give me a discount next time, huh?
Trespassers detected. Get rid of them immediately.
All the traps we have set have been destroyed. Useless. This is a warning. Leave the premises immediately. You cannot hope to defeat Stinger.
Trespassers detected. Get rid of them immediately.
A cool feature that this game brought to the series as a mainstay is the ability to import your mechs from previous entries into the expansions. Given how difficult these games can become in the late game, being able to carry your war machine and take advantage of the newer parts introduced in the expansions is a really neat feature, because abandoning most of the work you've done in the previous game feels like asking too much. I also happened to completely forget this was a thing, and I went to Phantasma completely naked, and I was getting cooked, not gonna lie. But by the time I started Master of Arena, I made sure not to repeat the same mistake, and I just went full crazy the way I decked out my AC. We should talk about that now actually, which I have some mixed feelings about it to be honest. As already established, in the main game, two major corporations, Chrome and Murakumo, are at war with each other to compete to the top. Unfortunately, some major civilian heavy zones happen to be in the crossfires of these deadly conflicts, and when a group of innocent civilians is caught in that crossfire, one of the remaining survivors, who lost his entire family, decides to enact revenge on the pilot who did it, a raven named Hustler 1 to be exact. So he joins the Raven's Nest in hopes of taking him down once and for all. Master of Arena follows the same narrative structure present in Phantasma, but this time it's more closely tied to the narrative threads present in the main game, and it also features some big revelations that recontextualizes not only the actions you were doing in that game, but also the way it shakes up the overall lore significantly. It's also the most intriguing and politically engaging stories of the three entries when it comes to incorporating both the personal and external conflicts happening within the universe, and corny or not the way you may see it, it's really cool to see how those aspects develop throughout the course of the game. What I am not a fan of, however, is the progression of the missions themselves. One thing I didn't mention until now is that Project Phantasma introduced a new mode called Arena, where you can duke out with other AC pilots of varying difficulties for either earning credit or earning new parts. It was something optional and an extra for people who can't get enough of the combat in these games. The problem I have with Master of Arena is not how this mode is now mandatory for the campaign, but the way they approached implementing it. Throughout the campaign, your client, who works at the Raven's Nest, gives you the missions you have to carry out, and she also helps you in your quest to get back at it with Hustler 1. To do so, you have to compete in the arena to rise the ranks and eventually face him. The only way you can have access to the arena is by being sponsored by a corpo to be able to compete. So far, so good. Once you get further into the game loop completely shifts, where you have to attend to missions, and if none is available, you have to go to the arena until newer ones become available for story progression's sake. No problems with any of that too. One of my first issues, and as stupid as this may sound, is how significantly difficult these battles become. Now, I have no problems with difficulty, but in this case, the difficulty for me doesn't come from the challenge the game offers, but the fact that I'm wrestling with the controls to actually be able to fight back. Because even with the semi-modern setup I'm rocking with, some ACs just zigzag all over the place, and it's really hard to keep up with them when the camera also does the bare minimum to keep up with my target. Call it a skill issue, I guess. The second and less egregious one is how during your arena battles, in specific story beats, your sponsor will send you on emergency missions, and as a result, they'll revoke your license temporarily, prohibiting you from participating until you complete them. Having to constantly shift between different styles of missions abruptly once you're in a particular state of mind gets really disorientating, and as a result I became less and less interested in what I was doing. And I just wanted to see how the story wrapped up. I pushed through and eventually got to the end of the 3 entries, with Master of Arena becoming the one I enjoyed the least. What I'm not so soured on, however, is the music. Master of Arena marks the introduction of Kota Hoshino, who would remain as the main composer for the entire series, and even though Keiichiro was still present in a team for sound, you can immediately feel the energy Kota brings to the soundtrack, which is just spectacular, blending a lot of rock and EDM, resulting in the most experimental compositions you'll ever hear on a PS1 game. And Keiichiro doesn't slouch in the slightest too, bringing his own A-game regarding what the series is known for, while also delving more into experimentation himself, and the variety brought in is just ridiculously good. Out of all three, this is definitely my favorite soundtrack in the series so far. The only disappointment I have is this game's sound mixing, where the music feels less prevalent when the majority of the game's soundscape is occupied by gunfire and explosions, which is a shame. If you remember, a few moments ago I mentioned how I was torn on the story with the way I consumed it, and while in the end I ended up enjoying all of this by absorbing most of the info, I also want people who want to experience these 3 entries to play in the best way possible, so here's as follow. If you're a story first person and don't mind the difficulty, I suggest playing a Master of Arena first, followed by Project Phantasma, and afterwards Armored Core. But if you're really adverse to difficulty from the get-go and want to gradually work your way up, then play through Release Order. The commonly agreed order to play is through Release Order, but if you want to ease into the story, you can't go wrong with playing backwards either if the difficulty doesn't send chills down your spine. And there you have it, folks. Briefly summarizing my thoughts, my playtime counting all 3 games together comes just shy of 20 hours, and I definitely had the time of my life just sinking my teeth into these games and researching them while writing this. Going from figuring out how the controls work to becoming obsessed with the lore and narratives developing around it, even the music, which I already knew I was going to love. Armored Core is definitely that franchise I want more of, and with 14 more entries ahead of me, I have a lot of catch up to do, until I get into Fires of Rubicon, which I'm excited about and can't wait to talk about it more here. Once again, I really do apologize for such a late release, because the plan was to play through the series from February until the release of 6 coming out next month, which is still happening by the way, but stuff happens and you just gotta deal with it. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe, share with your friends and activate the bell so you can get a notification of my latest video, and thank you for watching.